I've come to realize that apparently other people dress up for nice sit-down videos like this. Meanwhile, I'm over here in a t-shirt and leggings because I spent the whole day in fancy clothes. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my October reading wrap-up. Before I get into anything bookish, however, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments which was the best book you read in October. Ah yes, unfortunately, October is officially over. It was my favorite month. I went in with such high expectations of what I was going to read. I didn't quite hit those, but I still had a pretty good reading month overall. Let's go into my stats first off. I read 8 books this month, and across those I read about 2,776 pages. My average rating for the month was 3.82 stars, so not too bad, but not the best. I did have one soft DNF. It is still technically up on my currently reading shelf, but I haven't touched it in 3 weeks, so we're officially going to call it a temporary DNF. My genre breakdown included 3 horror books, 2 romances, 1 fantasy, 1 mystery, and 1 nonfiction. I did not think of a way to order this video, so we're just going to go chronologically from when I finished these books. Starting out first is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, and I read this as a part of my Grady Hendrix author taste test. I will put a link to that in the cards and in the description down below. I ended up really enjoying this one. I think my tagline for this book is going to be, I've never enjoyed a story so much while also being so enraged by it. This is a book set in the 1990s following a group of stay-at-home moms who have a true crime and mystery book club and come to believe that this new man who has recently moved into their town is a vampire. This book develops into so much more than that synopsis, but I don't want to tell you anything apart from that synopsis. I just have to say, be prepared for this to go off the walls and have a great time reading it. I didn't think this was going to be what it was. I was expecting more of a fast-paced thriller with some horror elements. Definitely got the horror, gag-worthy, very visceral, completely unsettles you. But that's not the scariest bit in the story. No. The scariest bit is the amount of abuse and gaslighting that just goes on constantly and is unquestioned for a majority of the book, as well as the total dismissal of minorities and their problems, which are very serious issues in this book. I do think Grady Hendrix did something very interesting by making the main characters of a horror book stay-at-home moms in the 90s. I don't think that's really a perspective you see a lot in horror stories, and I think it was an interesting shift in the perspective we often view. This book caught me off guard many times in the different twists and turns it would take. Impressive that Grady Hendrix managed to have this great social commentary. It definitely gets very aggravating. Like I said, such a good book. Really enjoyed the reading process. Still made me so furious. Overall though, my biggest complaints definitely were the fact that there would just be really random descriptions of naked women out of nowhere, often used for shock value, but I don't think it would ever add anything really to the scenes, because what would be happening was just as shocking even if the character had been clothed. On top of that, there's a event that happens towards the end of the book. Also seemed like it was used for shock value. Didn't really appreciate it. Don't think it was truly necessary. I guess it kind of upped the stakes a little bit, but all in all, I think the book would have been fine without it. In the end, I went with 4 stars on this one. Like I said, very enjoyable read. Just be aware you're probably gonna get a little angry. Following that, I read Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty. She is a cremator and mortician. This is the last of her published works I had unread, and now I think I can officially label her as one of my favorite authors. I read this as a part of Stabathon. I actually have a reading vlog for that as well, so I'll put a link to that in the cards and in the description. As I mentioned, Caitlin Doughty is a cremator and mortician, and this book is a compilation of all the questions she's been asked by children in terms of weird things they think about when it comes to death, and she answers them. There's also a little cartoons to go along with each of them, and they ride the line between being creepy and adorable, and I thought they were so perfect for each of the questions. Unsurprisingly, I really loved this just as much as her other works. Having now finally finished out all of her currently published works, all I can think when it comes to Caitlin Doughty is about that fantastic line from Patch Adams when he is giving his speech to, I think it's the board of directors. I'm going to insert a little clip right here.
What's wrong with death, sir? What are we so mortally afraid of? Why can't we treat death with a certain amount of humanity and dignity and decency and, God forbid, maybe even humor? Death is not the enemy, gentlemen.
The tone of this book overall is definitely more lighthearted, and the focus is on educating kids, but at the same time, I think it's something adults can enjoy just as much. I still learned plenty of things about this. There was maybe 1 or 2 things that were repeated from her previous books, but all in all, the entire time I was reading this, I was so engaged and hooked in. Every time I picked it up, I was never bored. I also love the questions that she picked to answer because all of them seemed very interesting and just like, how do kids come up with some of these things? And I love that they aren't afraid to ask questions like this because they don't yet know the whole taboo around death that we have in our society. And I love the way their brains are working. There's an extra bit at the end where she answers a few more additional questions that she couldn't stretch into full-on chapters, but still wanted to give attention to. And I love that she did that. I gave this 5 stars. I'm not even a little bit surprised. I'm trying to figure out who I want to give this to for Christmas. So if anybody in my family is watching this video, you might be getting this. Then also part of Stabathon, I read Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a novella following our main character. I believe his name was Sawyer, in which he and his friends go to prank their friend that works at a movie theater by taking in a mannequin with them and assembling it within the auditorium. And then when the manager comes in to check everybody's ticket, they even have a ticket for the mannequin, and they're thinking like, oh, he's gonna see it's a mannequin, and yeah, dumb teenage prank. But at the end of the movie, the mannequin gets up and walks out. That's all I'm going to tell you. I read The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones this time last year, and I was really wanting to pick up more of his work. I didn't make time for it until Halloween time, which works perfectly because most of his stuff is all horror books. And once again, I definitely enjoyed this. Right out of the gate, the writing for this is very creepy. There's tons of foreboding literally from the first sentence. On top of that, I think it's impressive that Stephen Graham Jones managed to make the voice in this story so perfectly sound like a teenage boy. But as the story progresses, it gets darker and darker, and there's this unique twist that just feels so terrifyingly real. That sounds weird when I'm talking about the fact that a mannequin gets up and walks out of a movie. At the same time though, it also kind of feels campy horror movie-ish because the premise is just so lighthearted and doesn't seem all that terrifying, but it manages to get there in 120 pages. This is going to seem very vague, but I also think this is the first time I read a book with this sort of a character's perspective, and it was just very interesting, and I had a great time watching Sawyer as he works through his thought processes, justifications of what he saw and what he thinks is happening. It was also just making me so nervous to see how this was going to end. Oh, and also the town that this book takes place in, yeah, I know that town. So that was also terrifying because I could quite easily visualize what was happening in the book. Very creepy. This is a really quick read, really unsettling. I definitely recommend this if you have like a readathon or something that you need a book for. Go with this one. It's short, it's sweet, but dang, it's unsettling. I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, I finished the second book for my author taste test. So that was The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. And unfortunately, this had a really strong start and a very disappointing ending. The urge to say title of your sex tape is very strong right now. So summary-wise, this is exactly what it sounds like. It is a support group of a bunch of women who were final girls in these terrible massacres, but the massacres that they have survived are all actually movies from our world. So, for example, the first one you learn about, Adrienne, she was actually the survivor of basically the Friday the 13th movies, and I just thought that was so entertaining and such an interesting way to pay homage to all of these horror classics. Unfortunately, this book didn't feel like a horror book. I think I would maybe put it at a thriller for like half of it, but at the same time, there's this weird lull in the middle where nothing particularly important happens, and the stakes just drop out of nowhere, even though in the back of my mind I was constantly thinking, someone is trying to kill all of these final girls. Oh, I guess I That's the final bit of the summary. Is it's a group of final girls and one of them ends up dead. The main character, who is incredibly paranoid, thinks that someone is trying to kill the rest of them now. And even with that in the back of my mind, stakes still felt so low as this story moved. It just ended up being so disappointing because I really loved the basis of this story. I loved the beginning. I really enjoyed the paranoia we were able to see and how it could infect us as the reader from our main character, but it also just kind of dissipated. I guess the twist that takes place at the climax was dramatic and convincing. It was kind of surprising, I guess, but by that point I didn't care anymore. Unfortunately, I went with about 2.5 stars on this one. Just overall, not what I expected from the beginning of the book. Very sad about that. This book was supposed to be for Spooktober, which was a readathon lasting all of October, and I initially was going to vlog for that readathon. However, I only finished this one book for that readathon. That's unfortunate. So that video got scrapped. The one book I finished, though, was The 𝗖cie by Erin Sterling. This was the romance I picked from Book of the Month for October. Basically, we are following this young woman who is a witch, and when she was 19 and heartbroken, she put a curse on her ex-boyfriend. She jokingly put this hex on him, or so she thought, until 9 years later when he returns to the town and suddenly bad things are happening to him left and right, and it eventually spreads to start affecting the entire town, and she has to work with him to try and stop it. So it's second chance romance, kind of has some hate to love going on in there. Definitely all of the tropes I loved, and the atmosphere throughout this is just perfect for Halloween. I kept pitching this as Sabrina the Teenage Witch all grown up, and that's definitely how it feels. I had a great time with this one. I think the characters weren't too developed, but they were likable and easy enough to self-insert with that you can't help having a fun time. Pretty early on, this book establishes itself as a rom-com. When Reese first gets back to the town, I was just cracking up. Oh my gosh, it was so funny. And I really appreciate Vivi's cousin. I think it was her cousin. I don't even remember what her name was. Gwen, that's right, because her name was Guinevere. I really appreciated Guinevere as well. Not just the witches, there are other supernatural elements in this as well. There's tarot, ley lines, ghosts, plenty of things like that. The action sequences they're a little hard to visualize, and they seem pretty fast. I guess because I was also reading some horror books where action sequences tend to take a good amount of time. These just were very underwhelming. The romance itself, anytime their initial relationship is brought up, we are told that they were so in love. There wasn't any backing of that to convince me that they actually were this fantastic pair. So then I didn't really have much belief that they were going to end up back together, because all in all, I don't think they were in love. I think they were in lust. So it made it a little difficult to feel invested in the relationship. With that, unfortunately, the spice level is pretty low. I thought with the amount of tension going on that it was going to be pretty spicy whenever we finally broke that tension. So all in all, I do think this is a very fun romance read, particularly for Halloween, but it's not a new favorite. I definitely am going to keep it on my shelves because honestly, I'm probably going to reread that scene whenever Reese returns to town anytime I'm having a bad day, because it was so funny. But I went with like 3.75 stars on this. Putting it at a 3.5 just sounded too harsh, but I don't think it's good enough for 4 stars. Then, as a part of a different reading vlog for the month, I read The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones. This was for my Raid My Shelves. You know the drill. You got it. I didn't think this was gonna be a new favorite. In fact, I went into this a little nervous because it's a standalone fantasy, and oftentimes those can be kind of hit or miss. I should give you a summary. Right. The story is following 2 main characters. First up is Wren, who is a gravedigger in her village and also can take care of the bone houses, which are zombies that were not properly buried. They can come back to life within the forest and are now starting to encroach on the village land, and that's a problem. She ends up getting paid by Ellis, who is a map maker, to be taken into this forest. I ended up really enjoying this. This book is proof that a standalone fantasy can have a atmospheric world with some cool magic going on, well-developed characters, and a strong plot. That being said, this is slow moving, but apparently I'm learning that slow moving fantasy is just my thing. I love that this took the time to develop out the world and explain the legend that this story was based on, because this actually has basis in Welsh folklore, and that was just fascinating. So this kind of has that fairy tale feel, but the atmosphere in it is so creepy and at the same time whimsical. Welsh mythology is not something I'd ever really seen before as the basis for a fantasy, and apparently the author is actually planning to come out with another book set in the same world, also with Welsh folklore as the basis, but with different characters, and I'm so excited. The slow-moving beginning also ensures that the characters get a good bit of setup, so we really get to know each of them, what is driving them for the plot to progress forward. Rin was so interesting. I loved that she was stubborn and confident and witty and a badass. So entertaining to watch. Also with Ellis, I'm not usually a big fan of golden retriever boys, but he was just, oh my gosh, I loved him so much. The loneliness that this boy exudes and his relationship with Pain is just heartbreaking, but he's also so lighthearted and he's the one always cracking jokes. He's also the biggest simp for her, and I loved it. Guys, I loved it so much. So if you can't tell, technically I initially rated this at 4.5 stars, but I feel like, if I'm being honest, it's definitely more of a 5-star for me. It's so good. Okay, y'all ready for a mini rant? I also finished Night Film by Marisha Pessl, also picked this up for my Raid My Shelves, and I went into this with pretty high expectations. I'd heard great things about this from Jess at Books Past Bedtime, as well as Haley at Haley Hughes, and at the beginning of the book, I was having a great time. First, let me explain the summary. This story is following a disgraced journalist named Scott. In the past, he had made some pretty serious accusations against this big-name film director who has all of these really hardcore films that are kind of cult classics and are very popular in the underground world. Recently, has been pulled back into Cordova, who is the director's life, by trying to investigate what happened to Cordova's daughter when she recently committed suicide, and he is not convinced that it actually was. He ends up getting 2 sidekicks along the way, and they work together to try and figure out what happened to Ashley, Cordova's daughter, or what led her to do this. The characters in this are genuinely quirky and odd. They don't just say that, they actually are. They are entertaining, but at the same time so frustrating. It keeps you engaged, but also kind of unsettled the entire time. I was hooked by the mystery. I was really interested to see how all of these odd clues were going to come together to give us an official answer for what happened to Ashley. Around 60% in, things just got really weird and convoluted. The characters just don't really make sense anymore after that. The sidekicks both seem to be satisfied with this very simple answer that's given, but it just feels so unrealistic given the amount of tension and clues that have been built up to give us something more by that point. Along with that, this does start to take a bit of a turn where you're trying to figure out, is something supernatural happening here or is it realistic? Usually I love that kind of thing. I really enjoy that. But Scott has been characterized as a realist and only basing his opinions on facts up until this point, and yet he becomes way more convinced by the supernatural elements at that point, and it just didn't make sense given the fact that he's been characterized as a skeptic up until this point. This needed to be edited down. It's about 600 pages, and I think nearly every single place or person that is introduced is given about half a page of description to visualize them, but I don't think that's constantly necessary because it starts to take away from the main mystery. It sort of messes with pacing, makes it seem like stakes can never get too high because we're not focused on the murder or the suicide, rather we're focusing on this new player that's been introduced or this new place that's been introduced. I also think this would have benefited from an omniscient outside narrator and not being in Scott's perspective, because he is definitely doom and gloom, bleak, cynic. It's exhausting reading from that perspective, particularly for me. I'm an optimist. I will admit that right here, right now. I also don't think I mentioned previously that this is told in multimedia format, and at the beginning I really enjoyed that element because I thought it was very interesting how 𝗖cie was expressing the background of the plot and actually giving us clues to progress forward alongside Scott. But as the story goes on, the number of multimedia elements dwindles down. Finally, there's one last one at the end of the book, and I just don't think it was really necessary at that point, and also just seemed kind of out of place. The ending reveal, it was shocking, made the most sense, and I understand why the author wrote it that way, but I was disappointed. And yet, after that twist happens, the book keeps going. That was also shocking to me. We have a scene in which the trio of detectives reunite. That was pretty sweet. We also have a scene where Scott finally starts to pay more attention to his daughter and try to improve his relationship with her, and I really enjoyed that. However, for some reason, it keeps going in terms of the mystery after that. By that point, I was just trying to finish the book. I really think that the last 20 to 30 pages of this book could probably be completely cut out, and it wouldn't change anything. In the end, I think this book was impressive for the way it was told in the interactive multimedia element. I think how the story showcases clues that can be twisted to fit different narratives is very well done, but God, it was way too long. In the end, I'm only giving it 3 stars. This was a bit of a letdown also. Apparently, this was the month for having great starts of books and disappointing endings. Finally, the last book I read this month was Isn't It Bromantic by 𝗖cie RH, and I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. It is November 1st, and I finished this book today. I finished it about an hour ago. I have not taken the time to write a review, so we're going to do this baby off the cuff. If it sucks, I'm sorry. I'm a writer, not an improver. So this is the 4th and final book in the Bromance Book Club series, following a variety of men who are big name celebrities in Nashville, and all of them have their own romantic problems. They have a book club in which they read romance novels to try and improve their relationships. This newest one was following Vlad, who is the Russian, and he is in a marriage of convenience. Vlad married his childhood best friend so that she could move to America with him when he became a big name hockey star, so that she could try and start over. However, she has her own secrets going on, and they end up not communicating for so much of this book. Going into this, I knew I was gonna have some problems because fake relationships are just not a trope I enjoy, and I knew that going in, yet I was very hopeful because I love Vlad. He was always one of my favorite side characters, so I really was excited to see his romance story. All in all, I did enjoy this. I do think 𝗖cie RH writing and how humorous she is really helped this story for me. I also love that she brought back the excerpts from the romance book that the book club is reading. She did that in the first and then eliminated it in the second and third, I believe. And in this one, the book that the club is reading is actually Vlad's romance book that he is writing himself. I loved that element of it because you could really see how Vlad's relationship was influencing his writing in the story, how he didn't even realize he was working through his own feelings by writing this story. This was pretty adorable, definitely has some steamy moments. This was very sweet because you could tell both of the characters cared a great deal about one another, but they just wouldn't communicate that, and it was so frustrating. I haven't done a call-pile breakdown of this one yet. Editing Nat will put it up on the screen for you guys. Okay guys, we managed through. I don't know how I'm possibly going to edit all of this because this is 45 minutes of filming. So as always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!